Grenada. A lot of people know this country as Spice Isle, or the Isle of Spice. And for good reason. Because when you walk through the capital, the air literally smells like nutmeg and cinnamon. It's dreamy, but beneath that postcard perfect facade is a history that is, frankly, wild. It's full of indigenous resistance, colonial tug-of-wars, and a Cold War showdown that put this tiny island right in the crosshairs of the United States. So, if you're ready to explore more of Grenada's story with me, stick around. Our story starts about 2 million years ago. The Caribbean Sea was empty and blue. Then out of nowhere, the ocean floor suddenly tore open and an underwater volcano erupted. After a while, it cooled. And that's how this rugged, mountainous paradise came about. It was literally born from fire. The island then became home to the Arawaks, followed by the Caribs. These were indigenous groups who migrated up from South America. Then, in 1498, Christopher Columbus sailed by and sighted the island. He thought he could conquer this land, but the Caribs were tough. They successfully defended their home for over 100 years after that sighting, even scaring off the British in the early 1600s. Eventually, though, the French managed to settle in 1650, founding what we now call St. George's. The next couple of hundred years were a whirlwind of who owns the island this week? So here's what happened. The French built sugar plantations and, tragically, brought in enslaved people from Africa to do the brutal labour. By 1783, under the Treaty of Versailles, France handed Grenada over to Britain. And life under the British wasn't easy. That's why in 1795, a mixed-race planter named Julian Fido led a massive rebellion. The goal was simple: overthrow British colonial rule, abolish slavery and establish a black republic, inspired by the French and Haitian revolutions. Now, while it didn't succeed, it showed the spirit of resistance in Grenada was unbreakable. After several years in 1834, slavery was finally abolished, and the island shifted from sugar to cocoa and, eventually, that world-famous nutmeg. Even so, Grenada still spent the next century as a British colony, which means that the itch for freedom was only getting stronger. So in the 1950s, a man named Eric Gairy started the island's first real Labour Party, and by 1974, Grenada officially raised its own flag as an independent nation. But don't celebrate just yet, because independence was not all it was cracked up to be. Gairy's rule became, well, controversial is an understatement, and let me tell you why. In 1979, while Gairy was out of the country, a young brilliant leftist named Maurice Bishop led a bloodless coup. He started the New Jewel movement, building schools and medical centres, but also cozying up to Cuba and the Soviet Union. As you can imagine, during the height of the Cold War, this made the US very nervous. Now the plot thickens. In 1983, Bishop's own hardline allies thought he was going soft because he was playing nice with the Americans. So they arrested and executed him by firing squad. It was a shocking, violent end to his leadership that threw the entire island into total lockdown and essentially invited the US invasion that followed just days later. Enter President Ronald Reagan. Concerned for 1,000 American medical students on the island, and definitely worried about a new Soviet outpost in the Caribbean, he ordered a full-scale invasion called Operation Urgent Fury, which was all about protecting American citizens and restoring order amidst the fears of Cuban influence and Soviet expansion. But here's a fun fact. The US troops had such bad intelligence that some were literally using old tourist maps to navigate the jungle. And within a week, the revolutionary government collapsed and the US paved the way for a return to democratic elections. Since then, Grenada has been a stable, peaceful democracy, though Mother Nature hasn't always been kind. Because in 2004, Hurricane Ivan slammed into the island, damaging 90% of the buildings. But if Grenadians are anything, they are resilient. They rebuilt bigger and better. So now are you ready to see what it looks like? If you imagine the Caribbean like a long, curving jewellery chain, Grenada is the very last charm hanging at the bottom. It's sitting pretty at the end of the Windward Islands, so far south that if you hopped on a boat and sailed just 100 miles, or 160 kilometres further, you'd bump right into the coast of Venezuela. Then you've got the wild Atlantic Ocean crashing on the east side, and the chill, turquoise Caribbean Sea hugging the west. But how about the main island? Well, it's this little oval that you could literally drive across in an afternoon. It covers a total land area of about 344.5 square kilometres, or about 133 square miles. So it really comes as no surprise that this independent country is the second smallest nation in North America, only after St. Kitts and Nevis. But despite its size, Grenada isn't lonely. It's actually a whole family of islands. You've got Carriacou, which is known for its incredible coral reefs and a stuck-in-time charm, Petite Martinique, which is rugged and authentic, and feels like only locals know about, plus about 600 little uninhabited islets that look like emeralds scattered in the water. When you see the island from a distance, you can tell immediately that it was born from fire. It's a volcanic masterpiece with a jagged spine of mountains running right down the middle, all draped in thick, fuzzy green rainforest. The biggest one of these peaks is Mount St. Catherine, poking its head 2,757 feet, or 840 metres into the clouds. And get this, those ancient volcanic craters didn't just go away, they turned into something magical. Because high up in the interior is Grand Etang, a massive lake sitting right inside an old crater. It looks like something straight out of a fantasy movie. Here you'll find the Grand Etang Park, which offers rainforest hikes, wildlife, mostly monkeys and birds, and visitor facilities in case you need assistance. Now, if you're still looking for more outdoor adventure, you'll also find boiling springs in the north and deep, dramatic river valleys carved into the slopes. All thanks to that old-school volcanic power. Then, if you head down to the southwest coast, you'll find the capital, St. George's. And if you ask me, it literally looks like a painting. Imagine pastel-coloured houses stacked like Legos up the steep hillsides, all overlooking a perfect natural harbour. The waterfront is called the Colonial, named after the days when old sailing ships were dragged onto the sand to be cleaned. But today it's the yachting capital of the region and has a total postcard vibe. In terms of the weather, since it's so close to the equator, it stays a steady 84 degrees Fahrenheit or 29 degrees Celsius during the day, then cools off to a nice 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19 degrees Celsius at night. But here's the catch, you can't have perfect weather all the time. So prepare for a lot of rain, especially in November. Rain brings humidity, and that humidity is exactly why the island is so fertile. It's the perfect recipe for those famous spice trees and banana groves to grow. Overall, it's a warm, tropical paradise that feels totally alive every time the sky opens up. But if you think Grenada is just a sleepy paradise, the numbers are about to wake you up. Historically, the economy has been a two-legged stool: tourism and agriculture. As of 2024, the island's total GDP sat at about $1.39 billion, which sounds like a drop in the ocean globally, but locally, they are crushing it. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF for short, and the local government are actually in a bit of a who's more optimistic contest right now, because the IMF estimates that real GDP growth will hit 4.4% in 2025, but the Grenadian government is even more confident, estimating a massive 6.2% growth rate. This is being fueled by a huge construction boom, thanks to some rebuilding after Hurricane Beryl, and a major comeback in fisheries and agriculture. Speaking of agriculture, they aren't called the Spice Isle for nothing. Grenada is the second largest producer of nutmeg on the planet, supplying about 20% to 40% of the world's annual crop. And while agriculture only makes up about 6.2% of the GDP, the services sector, which is mostly tourism, clocks in at an impressive 79.5%. They are definitely leaning into that pure Grenada brand. Now let's talk about the workforce, because this is where the story gets really interesting. Back in 2021, the unemployment rate was sitting at a rough 16.6%. Then, by late 2025, it plummeted to 7.5%, the lowest in the country's modern history. And here's one reason why. Youth unemployment took a nosedive, dropping from a scary 42% down to 20.2%. That is a huge win for the younger generation. That's why right now the government is working hard to keep things stable financially. So far, they've lowered the general inflation rate to just 0.7% in 2025 by removing taxes, or VAT, on basic food items and subsidising electricity. Then on the debt front, they've managed to pull their public debt to GDP ratio down from 75.1% in 2023 to about 71.3% in late 2024, with a long-term goal of hitting 60% by 2035. With these incredible numbers, you're probably wondering, what kind of government is running this country? Well, politically, they operate as a parliamentary representative democracy within the Commonwealth. It's stable, it's democratic, and they are using that stability to court foreign investors with tax incentives. Plus, they even have a citizenship by investment program that funnels revenue into development. It's basically a deal where global investors can put money into major local projects, like building new hotels or schools. And in return, they can apply for a passport. It's a huge win for the island because it brings in a ton of fresh cash to build up their infrastructure without the government having to take out massive loans. But let's be real, no plan is perfect. Even with that investor money coming in, Grenada still leans really heavily on tourism for about 80% of its economy. So if there's a global recession or another pandemic, the island will feel the hit first. Luckily, they've used these programs to build a solid emergency fund. They keep enough cash in reserves, or what they call import cover, to buy everything the entire country needs for at least 3 months, even if all other income stopped tomorrow. It's actually a pretty smart move, and it's all thanks to their adaptable nature. Which brings us to this next topic: people and culture. If you look at the faces of Grenada, you're seeing a beautiful, complex mosaic. About 91% of Grenadians have African roots, with ancestors who were brought over by the French and British to work those massive colonial plantations. But you've also got a significant Indo-Grenadian community whose families arrived as workers in the mid-1800s, plus smaller groups with French and English heritage. This mix created a religious landscape that's just as diverse, because while more than half the island is Roman Catholic, thanks to that early French influence, you'll also find Anglicans, Methodists, and strong Hindu traditions within the Indian community. And like other countries, this diversity extends to other cultural aspects. Specifically, language. Sure, English is the official language, but on the street, you're mostly going to hear Grenadian Creole English. Then, in older communities, you might even hear traces of patois, which is a French-based Creole. Of course, this cultural remix flows right into the music too. Most days the air is filled with soca, calypso, and reggae. And they celebrate their love for song and dance through festivals. One in particular happens in August. It's called Spicemas. It's their version of Carnival, and guys, it is intense. Think of it like Mardi Gras, but with a deeper history. Because back in the day, it was a way for people to openly mock the authorities. Today, it's an explosion of steel pan music, and the famous jus vert, where people cover themselves in paint, mud, and oil to dance through the streets until the sun comes up. But if you want something a bit more traditional, you can head to the sister island of Carriacou in December for the Parang Festival, which is all about folk music and community drum circles. Now, a festival is never complete without food, and you haven't truly experienced Grenada until you've shared a pot of oil down. It's the national dish, and it is a total soul food masterpiece. It's a one-pot meal with breadfruit, salted meat, dumplings, and coconut milk. All slow steamed until the coconut oil is fully absorbed. It's communal, hearty, and basically the ultimate symbol of the island's spirit. And if you've got a sweet tooth, you're in luck. Grenada's organic cocoa farms make some of the world's best chocolate. They're so good that they have an entire chocolate festival every May. You can even find nutmeg-infused ice cream, which is the island's signature treat. It's definitely something that you should try before you leave. So, between the spicy food, the thumping drums, and that slow simmered oil down, Grenada is a sensory overload in the absolute best way possible. Now, I'm curious to know which festival's topping your list. Personally, I'm eyeing that chocolate festival in May. But sound off in the comments which one you'd love to go to. And as always, if you love this video, you're going to enjoy this next one.